Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Miranda Lambert called Wildcard. So when Miranda Lambert released The Weight of These Wings in 2016, I can argue it simultaneously opened a lot of doors, but also closed a lot of them as well. On the one hand, it played like a magnum opus, a long, winding, dusty look through her deepest insecurities and pain given her recent divorce that you can really only get from a top-caliber artist. Hell, trim the fat on that project and you easily have one of the best projects of that year. But it was also decidedly uncommercial as an album, winning a ton of critical acclaim, but not landing much in the way of crossover success in the way her previous albums had. And as much as I will stand up and say that Miranda Lambert was probably the most comfortable in the indie scene anyway, especially given her work with the Pistol Annies, who made their triumphant and underappreciated return with Interstate Gospel last year, which I still hold as one of the best albums of that year, it was kind of dispiriting just to know deep down that Nashville radio would probably wall up the door behind her and never let her see the same sort of mainstream traction ever again. But you know what? That could mean Miranda Lambert would be able to effectively make whatever the hell she wanted, which meant that I was not surprised that big changes seemed to be coming around with Wildcard. Not only was it her shortest album in over a decade, she also ditched her longtime producer Frank Liddell, bringing in Jay Joyce as his replacement, and I'll admit I immediately had some mixed feelings about that, because Jay Joyce's track record has been unbelievably hit and miss over the past several years, from highs with Brandy Clark and Eric Church to lows with Hailstorm and, well, Eric Church. Yes, he's gotten a fair bit better in recent years, but he's not going to elevate a song where the writing is not being up to par, which is why I was so relieved to see a murderous row of veteran songwriters behind Miranda Lambert. Most pulled from the indie country scene, with Natalie Hemby of Highwomen to Lori McKenna to Brent Cobb and Jack Ingram. So, okay, I'm excited. What do we get off of Wildcard? Oh god. So this review is inevitably going to come across as harsh, but that's also because I'm in the frustrating position of knowing exactly how great Miranda Lambert can be at her best, either in snippets across recent albums, or just flat-out killer projects like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and Revolution, and hell, I include Interstate Gospel in that group. And when I'm judging Wildcard by that standard, it's hard not to listen through this and consider it a bit of a lesser album, doubling down on the lower stakes of many of the songs on Platinum I didn't care for, and then amplifying questionable production to an unavoidable level, which at the end of the day doesn't make this a bad project. I've certainly heard country acts this year make left turns with bad production and sound a hell of a lot worse than this. But if you're coming into this project thinking that Jay Joyce is going to be a big problem, well, it's not just him, but yeah, that happened. And look, we're going to start with the production because it is by far the biggest change from everything that Miranda Lambert has put out before, and where Jay Joyce's influence has to come to the forefront. Now again, in recent years, my issues with Joyce has not been so much the tonal choices, but more subtle things like the mix balance and the layering. He's got a bad habit of getting in his own way when it comes to shifting the fidelities to certain instrumentals or songs, mostly to ramp up an edge or a very specific element to try to augment the punch. And yet, it can't help but come across as kind of over-mixed or muddy when he tries and mostly fails to blend them. Why there are synthesizers on this album at all is utterly mystifying, because they don't really match the gungy, rough-edged grooves that Miranda Lambert seems to have this time around. Too thin to sound rich or to augment the atmosphere, but too tinny and poorly placed to be ignored. For the vibe that a song like Dark Bars is trying to have, the synthesizers match with nothing. And that's not counting the points where the bass and the kick drums just seem way too heavy. Not to a point where they're blowing out the mix, they're also a little bit too rounded there, but it's obtrusive and you can't help but notice the density in the pickup, which I would say is trying for more of a funk vibe, but doesn't have the texture or flow or command of a stable groove to handle it well. Now we'll get to Miranda Lambert's vocals on this album in a bit, but one big reason why I've praised her so consistently is her emotive subtlety. Her delivery carries emotional depth and complexity, and while she can play the big garish crossover song, she can do a lot more with less. And yet you can tell that Jay Joyce has no clue how to properly position her in the mix to emphasize it. And some of this is a failure to meet in the middle. Performers like Eric Church don't rely on that sort of subtlety, and Brandy Clark's brand of charisma is a little bit more direct, same with Lizzie Hale. So Jay Joyce hasn't really had to produce for delivery that's all that complex, and it's not like Miranda Lambert is in Hellraiser mode here, again we'll get to it, but across a significant chunk of this album, her voice is just not really positioned in order to grab your attention, off to a shaved bit further back or layered in order to mute some of her impact. And I'll say it, that's a huge mistake. And sadly, it starts early too. The blubbery, ramshackle clunker of white trash is a terrible way to start off the album with its garish mess of textures that bizarrely remind me of My Church half flipped into a minor key, and Holy Water tries to add a creaking slice of southern fried funk that flatters nothing. Then we got Locomotive, which tries to be a little bit more noisy and cowpunk, but considering how Miranda Lambert's vocals sound even through a lo-fi filter, I seriously question if this was a lane that made sense for her at all. She's not Lydia Lovelace or Sarah Shook. There's a difference between sounding raw and just sounding fried. But those are the obvious production issues. You can also tell that Jay Joyce was trying to add some of the smokier atmospherics that she seemed to have used before, and yet his tonal choice seems really questionable. And the song that seems most indicative of his lack of subtlety in this department comes early with Mess With My Head, with the more rounded but burly guitar pickup, the heavier percussion, and all the synthetic vocal layering that features an utterly out-of-place synth touch breakdown. You could tell it's supposed to have a little bit more snarl to it, but it winds up just sounding really messy and muddy and overmixed. Same with so many of the layers of guitar and sandy drums that were stacked into the mist of settling down, that for some reason places Miranda Lambert's vocals behind the bass on the pre-chorus, which happens with the cymbals all throughout Fire Escape, by the way, or all the filmy flutters of atmosphere on Bluebird that don't really work. And what's frustrating is that with the majority of these songs, there is a genuinely strong tune here, with the exception of Tequila Does, which might have one of the more awkward chorus-verse transitions I have heard in country in some time. So, you know what, if the production got the hell out of the way, I could hear a lot of these songs really working. They probably come together pretty well live. Hell, Track Record effectively takes what might be a new wave groove and melody and puts it into a pretty fast-paced song that I'd actually think was pretty great if the guitar melodies were given any sort of organic warmth and the groove was well balanced. It was potential across a lot of these songs, but the production just utterly stymies them. But I also said we would talk about Miranda Lambert's delivery here, and the problem is that it's kind of intertwined with my larger issues with the album as a whole, which is mostly tied to the songwriting. And look, coming after The Weight of These Wings, which was the sort of soul-bearing confessional project that was probably more vulnerable than she'd ever been, exploring a breakdown of her faith, a lot of the consequences of her cheating, which she then admitted, and effectively a midlife crisis, damn near any project that is going to follow that was bound to have some lighter stakes. Fine. But there's a difference between lightweight and disinterested or disaffected, and that might be the crux of why Wildcard does not resonate for me in the same way. For one, it feels a hell of a lot less personal. Instead of the storytelling and anecdotes with a grubby texture and a deeper emotional complexity implied behind every line, a lot of the writing falls into the lines of punchy quips and the sort of cutesy middle-brow material that's not unfamiliar for her, but normally it's tempered with a deeper observation or theme or idea. Go back to a song like Automatic, prime example, holds up to this day. And sure, this might be a little bit more relatable. I see her audience liking this, and I can certainly imagine some of these songs not being that far removed from your average account posting memes for wine moms on Facebook. But the delivery, in order to make some of this click, normally it's a little brighter or more chipper. Think Casey Musgraves at Pageant Material, or Jennifer Nettles at Playing with Fire. Or on the flip side, you're actively being subversive, or there's a darker underbelly, which is what Miranda Lambert has done in the past. And yet I'm not sure her brand of tired, somewhat exasperated disaffection this time around is what makes this click. Go for a song like Way Too Pretty for Prison with Maren Morris, who actually sounds like she's trying, and outside of the feeling that Miranda Lambert circa the first Pistol Annie's album would have just killed the cheating bastard and risked it all, here it just feels like a bad punchline that winds up neutering itself. Or take Holy Water, which on the first verse seems to be trying to take pot shots at a hypocritical prosperity gospel at the expense of the poor, but it feels like it's missing the follow-through to truly land a cutting blow. I actually had some hope that Pretty Bitchin' would have some sort of welcome pot shots ready for the tabloids, which have likely made her life a living hell the past couple of years. But as a whole, the song just feels kind of complacent, a little empty of the deeper passion, which is weird because if you're looking for a running motif across the majority of this album, it is her general annoyance at falling for anyone and the emotional conflict that comes with making such a choice, be it on with Mess With My Head, How Dare You Love, Track Record, or it outright spills into the text as she describes herself as in love with love, or on the actual moments of making that choice, like settling down. Now, ultimately, across songs like Bluebird and Tequila Does, she seems more content to not make any choice, just focus on her art and her work, and a lot of alcohol. But the album then ends with Dark Bars, a downbeat ending to a pretty lonely and honestly kind of joyless album. Which, yeah, wouldn't surprise me coming off of The Weight of These Wings, but the production and writing style is only haphazardly in sync with that, trying to force a bouncy and fun album that she's been able to make in the past, but with mixed results, and man, it's just not really clicking here. But as a whole, you know what? It's hard for me to listen to this album and not imagine some real label drama behind this, because it feels like someone told her just make something that sells rather than something reflective of what she can deliver right now with more interesting complexity. Because let's be brutally honest, there's nothing on this album that she hasn't done better before, and we know from The Weight of These Wings and Interstate Gospel with the Pistol Annies that she is capable of punching a fair bit higher than this, even in more conventional lightweight lanes. But apparently that material doesn't sell because mainstream labels don't know how to market those tones despite there being a very real audience for it. So, extrapolating from that observation, and how it seems like Miranda Lambert's tastes run a little bit more thoughtful and indie than this, especially in recent years, but then you're swapping in a name producer with Jay Joyce for a more in-your-face style, which screams label mandate to me. I'm left with the impression that this is not an album that she really wanted to make, at least not like this, not like now. This sounds like something the label told her to make as soon as possible. And it feels very fragmented, the sequencing's wonky as hell, and if the terrible choice in singles continues, I can see this being her exit strategy from either getting dropped or going indie, getting out of the mainstream altogether. And these are observations I do not want to make. If there were standouts like she has had most of the decade, I would praise and highlight them. Keep in mind, I am a fan of hers. But Wildcard on its own is not getting there, which is why I'm giving it a light 6 out of 10 and only really recommended for the die-hard fans. Again, this is not bad. Miranda Lambert has a base level of quality and talent that beats a lot of her peers, and I'm absolutely convinced that she's got more great albums in the future. But with this, yeah, I'm sorry folks, this ain't it. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know, this is coming across a little bit more negative, but this production didn't work. I really wanted to like this album, and I just don't. The writing's not there, the production's not really there. She's made much better albums. Hey, if you want to actually see other reviews, links in the card over there. Also got links to episodes of Billboard Breakdown. But you know what? Forget all that. If you want to buy or stream this, maybe give her a little bit more traction, as I think she probably needs right now. Links down the card to actually buy or stream, and I got the poll up there. I'm curious where the hardcore Miranda fans fall on this, because you're not going to tell me this is better than Revolution or Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. You cannot say it's better than The Weight of These Wings. You can't say it's better than anything the Pistol Annies have ever put out. So, yeah, that's not a good tier to place this. Again, I'm curious where you all fall on this. You probably know as much, if not more than I do. But beyond that, hey, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.